Welcome to New Rechts, or for English listeners, New Right. My name is Daniel de Liever, and today we're going to talk about, you could say, the tension in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. And I'm happy today to talk to Professor Eugene Kontonovich. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
And for people that don't know you, you are like an Israeli American legal scholar, and you specialize in constitutional and international law. And you're also part of the right-wing Israeli think tank Kohelet, where you had the international law department. So
Used to be. Now I'm at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C.
Wonderful. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for being here today. And today, I guess there are two things I want to talk with you about. Let's first start with Israel in general. There's, of course, a lot about Israel nowadays in the Western news that is, let's say, negative in a lot of the mainstream news. So I want to shortly first talk with you about that. Israel has many geopolitical conflicts, of course, with its neighbors. So what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding that people might have overall that you hear in the West?
I think the biggest misunderstanding is that the presence of casualties or even civilian casualties in war is evidence of war crimes or something done wrong. Whereas, in fact, in any war, especially a war in urban territory, even the most moral and most careful army, which I think Israel aspires to be, is going to have attacks that result in civilian casualties. And from World War II to the Gulf War, the war against ISIS, it's civilian casualties are a tragic consequence of war, but they do not demonstrate that the war is being fought illegally. So people say there's 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 dead in Gaza. It's important to say that at least half of those are actual combatants, and that is perhaps the best combatant to civilian casualty ratio that one could have in urban conflict. But that Hamas, what makes Hamas different from other bad actors is they truly do not care about their own civilian casualties, and I think this makes them, which means there's no obvious end point to the war. Even Nazi Germany, which didn't care about other people, but they saw the death of their own civilians as a bad thing to be avoided, and Hamas does not see that.
I think that's a good point, but we still see a lot of people becoming, especially if I talk about the European perspective, becoming more anti-Israel. We also see more criticism and anti-Semitism coming. Why do you think that even though Israel is fighting this war, there's so much negativity in the public opinion now growing in the West?
So first of all, people respond to the information they're given. And Europe is full of false reports and blood libels and just clear made-up Hamas disinformation and propaganda to the extent that Israel is killing little babies. And basically, there's nothing new. That is to say, today's anti-Semitism turns out to be really just like medieval anti-Semitism. The Jews are killing little babies and things. But really, this time it's true. But what's amazing is that given that Jewish people has been hounded by these kind of allegations for thousands of years, before they had a country, it's amazing that people could still think, yes, previously those were just anti-Semitic blood libels. This time it happens to be true. But it's exactly the same kind of blood libels. So I think that's one reason. I think another reason is the large, obviously, Islamic migrant population in Europe. And finally, and this is not a new observation, there's this idea that Europe will never forgive the Jews for the Holocaust. And there's a reason that the allegations against Israel are so specifically relate back to the Holocaust, right? That is to say, the accusations, genocide, right? Why not just say war crimes or careful targeting? Because it's important. The ability to accuse Israel exactly of the crimes suffered by the Jews, in a sense, expurgates the guilt of Europe in those crimes.
Yes, and I think an even bizarrer thing is, if you think about it, what the alternative is, right? You see a lot of people now Even sometimes, even in the streets in the Netherlands, you could have seen during the short 12-day war with Iran, you could see some people with flags of the Iranian regime chanting for the Iranian regime, even though you would say that they have nothing really in common with Western liberal democracies. So why do you think that while that's going on, people are even going to support the radical Islamist regimes that Israel is fighting?
Listen, I'm not a social psychologist. I'm a law professor. But clearly, if there's just a deep hostility to Israel, and it's not based on sympathy to any kind of victims, right? So you could see as you pointed out, the war against Iran was deeply criticized in Europe, even though there really were very low civilian casualties. And it's quite clear the targets were focused on military targets. And at the same time, today, you don't see protests in Europe on behalf of the Druze, who are being massacred by Islamist militias in Syria. So there's, I think the ability to say that the Jews are the real Nazis is a way of saying maybe what Europe allowed to happen with the Nazis wasn't so bad. Maybe they had it coming.
It's an interesting point you're making here. And I think another point that people I sense might be feeling is that it's quite far away from them, the whole Middle East. So a question I see a lot is why should we even care, for example, about the threat of Iran that Israel stresses so much? Why do you think that, what's the case you would make for Western people to care about the threat of Iran?
First of all, Iran is already a major threat to Europe. Iran has sponsored real terror operations in the European Union, terror attacks. They maintain, through their Revolutionary Guard Corps, terror agents that they recruit throughout Europe. Much like Russia, they can recruit cheaply using Telegram. They can recruit disaffected youth. And Iran is currently recruiting and has recruited agents for attacks in Europe. And that's without the atomic bomb. With nuclear weapon, Iran would have a nuclear umbrella. And I think that's the key thing to fear. So someone in Holland might say, they're not going to nuke us. Okay, maybe that's true. But what they will have is the ability to impose their will politically without anybody having the courage to resist them. So if Iran gets the nuclear bomb, they can now impose a tax on all Persian Gulf oil traffic. They're already doing that now, right? Imagine the Houthis on steroids, right? Imagine if every ship passing through the Gulf has to pay $1 million to the Houthis, or 10% of the value of their cargo to the Houthis. They essentially would be, and this is what previous Islamic regimes have done, the Barbary pirates. It would essentially give them a stranglehold on the global economy, and the comfortable lives of materialism that everyone in Europe has known will now be at the mercy of the Ayatollahs. Then they could start doing other things, right? They could attack Israel and say, we demand the end of the Jewish state. Well, is someone going to really resist them and start a nuclear war? Then they could start demanding other things, right? They could demand better treatment for Muslims in Europe. Are you going to really start a nuclear war over this? And it will give them essentially the power to dictate conditions throughout the region, including Europe, and also use and send their proxies. What are you going to do to Iran when it sends Iranian Revolutionary Guard cadres to organize insurrections in Europe, and Iran has a nuclear weapon? Are you going to start a nuclear war? So once they have a nuclear bomb, they can do whatever they want. And they want things.
And do you think that it is, of course, now we have seen this 12-day war. Israel has been stressing this threat of nuclear Iran for years at this point. How I think a lot of people, therefore, especially in the mainstream news and maybe in the anti-Israel news, are skeptical of the real threat of Iran actually managing to get a bomb, a nuclear bomb. What would you say to, let's say, a Dutch audience that might be a little bit more skeptical based on what they've heard?
I just think there's absolutely no doubt that Iran wants to get a nuclear bomb. They have made it 100% clear. They have had a nuclear program that is dedicated to enrichment capacity, which no civilian, 20-something countries have civilian nuclear programs. None have the kind of enrichment that Iran demands. And you combine that with their agenda of death to America and death to Israel, by which they mean death to the West. I think it's completely clear. Why wouldn't they want a nuclear bomb? It's completely consistent with their ideology. They would have this war just for their civilian nuclear program. That's absurd. Nobody's stopping them from having a civilian nuclear program.
Fair point. And I think another thing that I'm just trying to get through some of the confusion that I hear a lot. Another point that people always say, even when it comes to the brutal acts of Hamas on the 7th of October, but especially with Iran, they say, it's Israel who is the aggressor here. They started this, especially with Iran. What would you say to people that have this view of Iran as now the victim, that have this heavy attack by Israel?
I mean, again, it's hard to respond not having actually heard this view, because I can't believe someone would have such a view. Iran was born in aggression. The first thing the Islamic Revolution did is take over the U.S. Embassy and hold the entire staff of the U.S. Embassy hostage for hundreds of days. It has been at war with the West continuously. The Revolutionary Guards have been the aggressors throughout the Middle East. Right? Iran, a Persian country, sent its militias to create puppet states in Yemen through the Houthis, in Iraq through the Iranian-backed militias, in Lebanon, in Syria, all of which became Iranian puppet states. And all of those militias were used to attack Israel. Now, the Houthis, that's Iran. The Assad regime, that was also Iran. And Hezbollah, that's all Iran. And they have all been attacking Israel, not just since October 7th, but even before that. Now, Iran's strategy has always been, Iran wants to fight the Zionist entity to the last Arab, is a saying. They obviously prefer to use their proxy militias, but they have in fact been attacking. And then in the past year, they have launched missiles at Israel directly from Iran. But when you have, the Revolutionary Guard, this is not just like they give money to these entities. Revolutionary Guard officers arm, train, equip, and coordinate Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Assad regime, all of which have been at war with Israel. So this war has been going on for years, not to mention attacks on Jewish targets throughout the world, which Iran has been responsible for over the decades.
I can imagine that it maybe is surprising to you. I think a lot has changed, at least in my mind, in the last few years, especially since the 7th of October. I think you stated before, when Iran says death to America, death to Israel, that they're talking about the West broadly. And I heard this, of course, being put forward, but most people, if you ask them through it, what they actually mean by it, it's hard for people to explain why they are so anti-Western, and why I guess the West as a collective should care about this. So maybe you can also, for people that are maybe not as familiar, explain why this is really not just an Israeli or an American struggle, but Western struggle in general.
It's not like they picked two Western countries, death to Israel and death to America. Israel and America represent two strands of the West, the kind of moral Judeo-Christian strand and the economic, material success and control strand, and they're against all of it. Why would Holland be safe if America is not? Right? That is to say, but again, I think if people in Holland think that they can be safe while a terror regime with nuclear weapons fights America, they're just burying their head in the sand. Listen, and again, the desire of people to bury their head in the sand, completely understandable, and nobody has really been counting on the Dutch, I have to say, to save this situation. And that's what makes Israel, Israel is a country with a will to live. We're not going to bury our head in the sand. And unlike European countries, Israelis have a lot of children, and they have a lot of future to be concerned with. And they are acting to ensure that there will be a future for their children. People who want to enjoy the now and don't want to care about the later, they don't have to concern themselves with this.
Yes, and do you actually think that with the short war we saw, there are a lot of people that are saying, okay, maybe the Iranian nuclear weapon development has been set back, but they can just wait it out, wait maybe till Trump is out of the office or someone else is in Israel in power, and they at some point they can just complete it. So I think there's also this part that people seem to be talking about. And what do you think is actually the game plan
There's
that
a
people in the West
strange
have?
criticism that Israel didn't permanently destroy Iran's nuclear program. Nothing in life is permanent. I thought when the Soviet Union collapsed, that would be the last anyone heard about communism. Now you have a socialist mayor about to be elected in New York. Nothing is permanent. You win today's battle, and then you have to fight again tomorrow. But if you lose today's battle, then you don't get to fight again tomorrow. And so, there's going to have to be continued work. So long as the Iranian mullah regime, dedicated to the destruction of the West and apocalyptic thinking, is in power, there will need to be further action to ensure they don't continue to get the nuclear bomb. Winning one round doesn't mean you don't have to fight another, but losing one round means you're out. The moment they get a nuclear bomb, nobody is going to support conflict with them, and everyone is going to say that their demands must be sated no matter what they are, and the demands are going to grow more gruesome and more gruesome. I can tell Iran, look at what Iran did in the countries it took over. Syria, it devoured. Lebanon, completely devoured. Yemen, these are countries racked by war and complete social collapse. That's what happens when you get, Iranian influence, and that influence will spread.
And what would you say to people? I also very often hear the comparison between Iran and North Korea, of course, who is also, let's say, not a fan of the West, has a very bizarre kind of ideology there. And even though they have already are quite far with this, they've not been able to make the same demands that you're now talking about. Potentially, of course, people cannot attack North Korea the same way, but and I guess it's basically.
First of all, is it a good thing that North Korea has a nuclear bomb? If it could have been prevented by a 12-day war with minimal civilian casualties, wouldn't that be a good thing? Right? Someone now saying that's a good thing, and North Korea does tremendous damage, channeling drugs, supporting, helping Russia in fight Ukraine. These are all things they have a carte blanche to do now. At the same time, North Korea is and has always been a much weaker, poorer country than Iran. Iran will be able to make far more bombs, and Iran has a missile program that far eclipses Korea's, because you need a missile in order to deliver it. Korea does not really have the missile technology that Iran has, and much of Israel's war campaign was actually against Iranian missile technology, which is how they would deliver the missile. North Korea happens to be further away from Europe. Iran is actually very close, and Europe is in range of the existing Iranian missile technology. And Iran has a history of exporting violence and revolution to the areas around it. North Korea is much weaker, but North Korea is definitely not a poster boy for having a nuclear weapon. It has now allowed this evil regime that brutalizes its citizens to prop itself up for the indefinite future. That is nothing. That is nothing to celebrate. And Iran has just been much more successful than North Korea in exporting global terror, and especially using Shia population around the world as their henchmen.
And how do you feel that if you go back to?
I would say another thing. What the North Korea thing points to is North Korea got a nuclear weapon because they said to President Obama, "We're negotiating, and instead of negotiating, they built a weapon." It shows the absolute futility of diplomatic processes with rogue states.
I think that's a good addition. And what do you think if we talk about diplomacy about other countries in big players in the Middle East? There are a lot of rumors about countries like Syria and Saudi Arabia might be joining the Abraham Accords and stuff like this. What do you think the impact is of this continuing conflict between Israel and Iran on other partnerships in the Middle East?
I think so Syria is still a country broken. And we see today they're mostly busy massacring their Druze, so they seem not too interested in the Abraham Accords. And I think the this massacre of the Druze. I think this is something people in Holland need to really think about. Why are they massacring the Druze? Druze never hurt anybody. And not everybody is Dutch. That is to say, there are people who are, I don't understand it myself, but looking at their behavior, they're, are driven by religious fanaticism, ethnic hatred that is deep, inexplicable, and will lead them to do apparently irrational things. Is there any reason behind it? No, we cannot expect everyone to act rationally, and we have to take ethnic and religious hatred and fanaticism as actual motivators of human conduct, even if we are nice, genteel Europeans who don't feel any such motives ourselves. The expanding of the Abraham Accords is nice if it happens, but it's not necessary if it doesn't. Already de facto, Israel is not like in a fundamental conflict with the Arab world. I think Lebanon is likely to join at some point.
And if you look forward, I think for a long period of time, this tension, even though if there are better relations now, no matter if they will join or not, will join the Abraham Accords, there's still a chance that you can see in many of these Arab countries that their population, even if their official stance is, you could say, neutral to Israel, that they are still very anti-Israel. So do you think this is in the end sustainable long term, or do other things need to happen?
No, I think it is in fact sustainable. First of all, what the population of an Arab country thinks is, at most orthogonal to the government policy of that country. These are not democracies. And in many countries, it seems not to be the case. So, for example, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, they truly seem to have good relations with Israel, and Israelis are traveling there all the time, and tourism is booming, and business is booming. So I certainly think, if peace were to come with Lebanon, which is a complicated society, I think there could be very good relations with some segments of that society, and most importantly with Iran. If the current Ayatollah government were to be removed or to fall, then I think Israel would enjoy great relations with the people of Iran. Each country is different.
Do you think it's likely that, because we have heard about this before, of course, that there's a vast majority of Iranians who want to leave this Islamic revolutionary times of the last few decades behind? How likely do you think it is that the current regime will collapse?
No idea. It's really a question of organization. The regime is organized for self-preservation. Its number one ability is the suppression of internal dissent. Now, that is what it's doubling down on. And the opposition seems less well organized. So it's really a technical question. That is to say, you can have the majority of people against the regime, but faced by an armed secret police willing to suppress dissent, they're going to need a higher level of organization to bring it down.
And lastly, if we go back to Europe, to the Netherlands and other European countries, what do you think they can do to, especially at a time where there is growing political and legal pressure to have sanctions against Israel, etc. We see this even on European level and on state levels. What do you think that European people can do in this hard time in the Middle East now?
Not jump on this bandwagon of anti-Semitic defamation. There's going to be a time when the Gaza war is over and things go, the bodies are counted, whatever, access is had to Gaza. And the myth of this alleged genocide will be so clear. I can tell you the Jewish population of Europe, the Jewish population of the world, has still not recovered to its levels of 1939. That's because there was a genocide, right? That is to say, the evidence lasts a century. And when it will be clear that there have been civilian casualties in Gaza, but there is no genocide, there is no systematic massacre except by Hamas of its own people, there's going to be a lot of shame at the anti-Semitic hysteria that swept Europe. Israel needs to be allowed to defend itself. Hamas needs to be brought down. And Israel now is becoming, the only actor in the Middle East willing to actually protect from genocide. Israel is now protecting the Druze from genocide. Is there any European country that would actually actively take measures and put its own men in danger to protect any minority in the Middle East. Israel's the only one. So I think Israel deserves a lot of credit for that.
Thank you very much for talking to me today. And if people want to follow you or your work, where could they do that?
I'm on Twitter, EV Kantarovich. That's a good place.
Thank you very much. And of course, also thanks to our viewers for making this possible. If you want to help these kind of conversations, please consider subscribing at nieuwrechts.nl, and see you in the next one.
Good talking.